This is Farah on fire. I'm concerned about Kamala's America. Will it be an American dream or a communist, Marxist, socialist nightmare? Well, today I'm talking to Pastor Darrell Scott. He's the founder and senior pastor of the New Spirit Revival Center, which is a non-denominational church in Cleveland Heights, Ohio. Pastor Scott, for the last 4 years, we have actually been living in Kamala Harris's America. She wants another 4 years. What would what would a Kamala Harris administration bode for our constitutional right, given by God, to the free exercise of religion?
Well, Kamala Harris seems as if she's taking pains not to mention God or any reference to a supreme being at all in any of her speeches. I mean, she won't even give a cursory God bless you when she concludes her speeches. I've noticed that once again, she has not included him in any conversation, taken him into consideration in any of her public announcements. And so it seems as if we're going to enter into a more godless society than we do now. You know, Joe Biden, at least, whether in practice, but in profession, he professes Catholicism. So that puts some type of restraint around him in his activity. But we don't know what Kamala Harris believes. And when we look at what her practices are so far, she supports everything, it seems, that is diametrically opposed to Christianity. She's a staunch advocate for the LGBTQ community, for transsexualism, for abortion, for transgender surgery with minors, all of the things that seem to be antagonistic somewhat or in opposition towards Christian values, she's in agreement with.
Well, I wholeheartedly agree. It seems to me she identifies as a Baptist. She was raised um, by a mother who is Hindu. And I don't think that the most important thing is to delve into her family life as a child necessarily and how her parents raised her, because it's today that matters. It's how she lives her life and what she professes, which I do not find her profession to be readily available. I know that she says she defends the freedom to worship. And this is a particular concern of mine, and I'd like to throw it to you. When she says freedom of worship, that's not what our Constitution says. It says the free exercise of religion. And so the freedom of religion is something like, hey, I can believe in a higher being, some God. I can have religious beliefs and I can actually worship in a place of worship or my home. I can pray. But that's not what our Constitution guarantees. It guarantees the free exercise of religion that is very, very expansive, and deliberately so, because that encompasses every single realm of our life, from family and marriage, these institutions, but also to include our work and public life and free speech. So she is in practice voicing a reduction or a limitation or a narrowing to an unconstitutional definition of what the First Amendment gives those of us who have faith, in terms of freedom and protections.
Wow. Yeah. Well, they seek to limit um, the individual's right to make their own choices because they want to decide whether they think an individual's choices are in the best interest of society or the masses, or whether or not their individual choices meet with public acceptance. And so, they begin with the little, but the little makes way for the big. They'll start with the
There's
smaller
always an
things.
incremental step by step by
Yeah,
step. And it
yeah.
takes
And so that
people off. It doesn't seem so harmful at the very beginning. And then they become uh, accustomed to that, numbed to that loss of a liberty, and then continuing on, taking a little bit more, a little bit more. It's sort of like raising taxes. Do a little bit at a time. Don't make it dramatic. People won't notice. When it comes to parental rights, you would say that that's fundamentally a religious right as well, would you not?
I mean, absolutely. When we talk about parental rights, they're trying to restrict or limit a parent's rights over their child. There's something we said years ago in our community when our kids would say, I'm grown. We would say grown is as grown pays. If you're living in my house and I'm paying these bills, then you are under my authority. And especially as a minor, you're under the parent's authority. When I was growing up in our home, kids didn't have any rights. We only had the right to obey or be punished for not obeying. Now they're trying to take away parental rights so that children can make decisions that they will live to regret. I mean, I'm 65 years old right now. When I look back over my life, I thought I knew everything when I was 15. And I realized now I was just a little snot-nosed baby that didn't know anything. My wife and I were looking at some pictures. My wife and I have been together for 45 years.
Wow.
And we looked at some pictures of us early in our marriage. And I said, you know what? We were just two babies. We were just two babies trying to survive in an adult world. And you don't realize that until you get older. And there were a lot of things I did as a young adult or as a child that if I had it to do over again, I wouldn't do it. But they're trying to allow children to make irreversible, life-altering, life-changing decisions, irrespective of and in spite of what the parent, who does know better and does have the best interests of their child at heart, despite what they think or despite what they say, they want to allow children to have rights that children are really not
Never in the
qualified,
history of the
competent.
world.
They're not qualified emotionally or psychologically to exercise these quote unquote rights.
I think you make some really good points there because never in the history of the world, in any kind of society, have children had the right to make decisions that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz both affirm. And so, what are they basing this on? This certainly not on their Christian faith or their supposed Christian faith. And it certainly isn't based on history. And it most certainly is not based on the history of the United States, our culture, our Constitution, the laws across America for the last 200 plus years. So it's like an invention, but really it is not, because what they're doing is taking it back to the Marxist ideologies of various kinds of socialism, whether it's National Socialism or Marxist or Maoist socialism. It's really Leninist socialism, whichever flavor you choose. The parents do not have the full, complete right to direct and govern their children's lives. The government ultimately has the decisions in child raising, in any aspect from education. And now, it's just mind-boggling that we would be talking about removing healthy body parts from 7, 10, 15-year-old children without their parents' permission. But so there is a history of this. It's just un-American. It's not American history, and it's not Christian. It's Marxist.
It's like you said, they're going to do these things incrementally. First, they take away the ultimate authority of the parent over the child. The parent no longer has the final child. The child can appeal to the government or to government agencies to override the will of the parent in deciding to do things like that. And it begins with sexuality, as you notice. It's beginning with sexuality, the definition of sexuality, but it's going to progress, believe me, from a child making decisions regarding sexuality to a child making decisions about sexual activity. And it will open up the door for pedophilia. It'll open up a door for the reduction of morals in this society. It will contribute to the overall moral decline and moral degradation of America. And we'll see that's what the ultimate end will be. It starts off with sexuality, but watch this. I have people talk to me and I give my perspective. They ask me, do I think homosexuality is a sin? And I say, yes. I think there are a lot of things that are sin. I don't minimize homosexuality as a sin, but I also say this. To me, it is a sexual preference. It is a sexual preference that people, they decide that this is the sexual preference, because if you take sex out of it, it loses its entire consistency. It's all a sex-based decision or lifestyle. And so children, let me tell you something. Somebody, had to try to have the argument with me that they were born that way. And I said, to be quite honest, nobody knows how they were born. Your earliest memories, if you're good, your earliest memories go back to about 3 years old. So maybe you can say from as far back as I can remember, I had certain proclivities. But you can't say I was born with those proclivities, and we don't know what inspired those proclivities. And not only that, at certain ages, you don't really even have sexual proclivities at 2 years old, at 1 year old, at 3 years old. And so they're trying to take this. It's driven once again by people in authority that want to influence society into accepting as normal that which was at one time abnormal, to make right what was at one time considered wrong. And it erodes the fiber of American society in the process.
Well, you mentioned pedophilia, and that really is such a disturbing notion because I've been wondering for a while when this would rear its head. And when I was reading the legislation or the history of what happened in Minnesota, whereby during Walz's term, the language protecting, no, excluding pedophilia as a sexual orientation that would be protected by law. This was a very explicit clause in, I believe it was their human rights law. I didn't know, most states had human rights laws, but they do in Minnesota. And it explicitly excluded pedophilia as a sexual orientation. That was removed from the language. It was proactively removed from the law, and therefore, it is possible now to have laws or judgments by the courts that pedophilia becomes a protected sexual orientation. This is something that Tim Walz, she had background checks done on her vice presidential, you know, her options. And she chose Tim Walz knowing each and everything about his legislative history, his personal history, career history. She knew this has been written about. So I think that this centrality of sex and gender is very, very it's it's something that you see across the leftist agenda from beginning to end, whether it's teaching children in schools or eventually making pedophilia as a right that's protected under the Constitution. Did you know about that pedophilia clause?
No, I didn't, but I can see where this blurring or of the lines in religion is something that is beginning to transpire under these types of administrations, these democratic administrations, because there are certain religions that condone child marriages.
Hmm.
That if you look in the history of these religions, if you look at the current status of these religions, or some of the religious founders of certain of these religions, they engaged in child marriages. They had child brides and different things like that. You can see in certain areas of the world where some of these religions are being practiced, you see the same thing. And so in America, in order to make that practice of that particular religion acceptable, they have to blur the lines for all religions and make it so that it's a matter of choice, whether or not you want to engage in, we'll call it pedophilia. They'll say it's not. They'll look at it as a normative practice and try to seek ways to affirm it and validate it and seek, try to put forth some type of argument for it.
That is, I don't know why that didn't hit me because in Minnesota, I don't have the figures in front of me, but the extremely high numbers of immigration from Somalia. We all know about that. I think it's got the largest Somalian community of migrants in the United States. I could be wrong about that, but it's there at the top. And
It's a large community.
so what I'm wondering is this the first step, which I've been waiting for, to child marriage being protected in America because of that Somali migration or Muslim migration? This is an aspect of Sharia law.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
many people, including myself, have been speaking out against the avocation of Sharia law in America. Obviously, it's completely against our Constitution. But this idea of pedophilia being pulled out of legislation or out of law, it was actually law that it was removed from, so that it might open this door incrementally to
Yeah.
eventually reaching the point that a man could not, or a family could not be prosecuted for giving their 9-year-old daughter for marriage, to marriage
And
under
think
Sharia
about
law.
this. Think about this. With them also blurring these lines regarding sexuality, they could be giving their 9-year-old son in marriage to a man.
Mm.
You know, it's a slippery slope. It's a
The
can of
doors are
worms. I mean,
open for
yeah,
anything, is what you're
and when
saying.
you look at certain roots, I mean, in India, there are child brides are in India. They have that over there. And not trying to besmirch anyone, but Gandhi had a yearning for young brides, and Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad, had a yearning for young brides, and you see those things in among their so-called holy men, and it's something that a number of those would love to reintroduce into American society in this 21st century. And once again, with the blurring of lines of sexuality, you can see those that have a predilection for boys or whatever, and you can see their sons being given in marriage because they'll say this son identifies as a girl now, and all that old nonsense.
Well,
It's a slippery slope.
now that Tim Walz is part of the, Kamala Harris has a history. So there is one piece of legislation that she supported very strongly, and I want to get to that. But going back to parental rights, being a religious right, it's obviously also firmly ensconced in our culture and history, but it's also constitutionally, there is nothing that diminishes the rights of parents. That is left to the individual. The federal government is not given that, delegated that right to diminish the rights of parents, which I very much fear would take place with, within Kamala's America. In Tim Walz, Minnesota, legislation was passed that would allow, say, an aunt lives in Minnesota and has her niece or nephew come to visit her in Minnesota, and they express that they have a desire to transition. Let's use that as an example. And the parents at home in Ohio are not affirming of their decision, their feelings, their desires to move forward. That auntie, or it doesn't even have to be a relative, can claim parental rights or authority over that child according to Minnesota law and take custody of that child, and therefore be the instrument and the guardian in their transitioning, taking these drugs that you said are so dangerous and you can't take it back. They're irreversible, and obviously irreversible surgeries. This is something that Tim Walz completely advocated and put into place in Minnesota. So are we to expect that in a Kamala Harris, Tim Walz America, that wouldn't be something pursued, perhaps even on a federal level or through executive orders?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised. Um, I would not be surprised about at all because if Tim Walz endorsed and endeavored to implement uh, issues, initiatives, activities in Minnesota, what's to stop him from trying to introduce them nationwide? The same people that approached him the same group, the same lobbyists or whoever that approached him regarding those bills in in Minnesota, the same dollars they dangled before his face or contributed to his campaign or whatever to get him to advocate for these things in Minnesota. You think they're going to be satisfied with Minnesota now that Tim Walz? Well, I'm not going to say now that he will be, but with the possibility that he could be the vice president of the United States. If you think that they're going to try to limit their activity to Minnesota, that's not going to happen at all. They're going to try to expand it nationwide. And as you stated, Kamala Harris is well aware of what Tim Walz believes. She's well aware of what Tim Walz promotes, what he espouses, and apparently she's in agreement with it because she selected him to be her vice president, or either the people around her, the people that selected her, selected him. I don't really believe she had final say, or she was the one that made that choice. I think they put that ticket together and put her at the head of that ticket. And Tim Walz, she's got him whether she wants him or not.
Well, she also, back to Kamala. Remember when that judge was there was a nominee up for a federal judgeship. His name was Brian Boucher, and this was in 2018. And he's a Catholic, and he belonged to the Knights of Columbus, which is a charitable organization feeding the poor, just helping the needy. And she attacked him. She also, questioned if he fully understood that when he signed up for this fraternal organization, that it was an all-male society. This is a quote, comprised primarily of Catholic men. So being an all-male society was definitely something that she objected to, but also she used the term extreme.